Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 25th of February of 2025. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. You know that when talking about the line of combat contact, we see that every day we receive less and less reports about additional progress on the ground, about another offensive operation. Yes, we have changes on the ground, we have changes in the area of Sudzha. The Russians are advancing because this area is the primary target for the Russians. We stop receiving almost anything from the area of Pokrovsk. The Russians still haven't managed to establish complete control over the city of Chasiv Yar. After the end of the battle for the city of Toretsk, the Russians reduced their activities, and furthermore, today we got reports that Ukrainians counterattacked and managed to restore complete control over some northern part of the settlement. Yes, we have a lot of updates from the south Donetsk direction, which most likely means that the Russians are planning to continue this offensive operation without counting losses, and they still have resources to complete at least this battle. But obviously, if we compare the situation between, let's say, August, September and October of 2024 and February of 2025, we can see completely different picture. We can see less losses, we can see less offensive operations, we can see a lack of everything. Because currently the most important thing is not the situation on the ground. Of course, it matters. It matters because the Russians are improving their positions and the Ukrainians are worsening their positions every single day, which will obviously will have effect during the peace talks and the final signatures or something like this. But as for now, the most important thing is the war between four sides, right? The Russian Federation, the Ukraine, the United States of America, and the European Union. It's not like a war like hot war. It's obviously the Cold War, the second Cold War between four countries, and now we see that every single country, every single side try to get as much as possible from the conflict in Ukraine. The United States of America wants their own resources, the European Union wants their own things, Zelensky wants himself something for him and for his team, and obviously the Russians have their own goals and own tasks. Let's discuss in details, because as for now this is very important to understand what does everybody want and what exactly and what is the status of let's say a progress of negotiation process. Let's begin from the United States of America. Donald Trump stated that he wants to sign let's say a deal for the rare metals that currently we can find on the territory of Ukraine. And for example, today Trump stated that the next week he's going to have a meeting with Zelensky, but only to sign this agreement, not for any other purpose, just to meet Zelensky to sign this agreement, and that's it, a mineral deal. You know what is mineral deal? Mineral deal means that United States of America and Ukraine are going to create something like a fund, some very big fund. The value of this fund is 500 billion, and Ukrainians will be forced to fulfill this fund by selling by providing different, let's say, by providing different services, by selling minerals, by selling different stuff from the territory of Ukraine. If they sell it, they are forced to take, let's say, 75 or 50% of income, and to send this income to this fund, which will be under complete control of the United States of America. The Trump says that this fund, the United States of America is going to use with the purpose to restore Ukraine, to help Ukraine to win corruption, and to rebuild Ukraine after the end of the special military operation. So what does it mean? Basically, Trump is going to do the same thing that Joe Biden did when he was a president. What does it mean? Biden announced during his presidency, he announced the significant number of military aid packages, and we saw a lot of talks and rumors about those things. If you remember, Zelensky stated that Ukraine basically received something around 75 or 90 billion of dollars, and Trump and Biden said that he sent more than 240, around 300 billion. So the gap is the money that Ukrainians and Ukraine Zelensky hasn't seen ever, which means that those money obviously were allocated, but the problem is that those money didn't even leave the territory of the United States of America. They were allocated to, for example, different military plants, productions. Of course, these plants were producing weapon, missile, tanks, vehicles, I don't know, everything, and then these things were sent to Ukraine. And of course, the main problem for Ukraine in this schema is that the American US producers who produce weapon can set any price they want. And if you remember, since the beginning, at the beginning of the special military operation, for example, the price for 155 military shell was around $1,000. And somewhere in 2024, there was a very interesting report that the price for 155 millimeter shell was around $6,000 or $8,000. So obviously, we see that the price increased for several times from nothing. It's obviously from nothing. And this is not nothing. This is exactly how the schema that was created by Biden administration worked. They signed contracts with producers, military companies in the United States of America. They set their own prices, which were very good for them, and that was the help. So Trump is going to do almost the same thing. He is planning to restore Ukraine. He is planning to use all these monies allocated to this fund to restore Ukraine, to build different things, to rebuild maybe towns, cities, factories, and many other things. But the difference and the problem is for Ukraine is that they're going to be the same story. Ukraine will allocate money to this fund, and the US, the Minister of Finance, the Secretary of Treasury, will use this money to pay US companies, or maybe not US companies, but those companies who has contracts with the United States of America for this purpose. So basically, it's the same. But during Biden, it was military aid. During Donald Trump, this is going to be the same schema, but not with military aid, but with the purpose to restore Ukraine. But this restructuring of Ukraine will be made by US companies, and those companies who will have contracts with the United States of America. So that's it. The second resource, and obviously I believe that Donald Trump will force Zelensky to sign this peace agreement, because this is the part that the United States of America want to get after the end of the special military period. So this is their share in this war, and obviously Zelensky will be forced to sign this deal. Now let's discuss the situation with the European Union. They have a little bit different interests. Their interests are focused mainly on the frozen Russian assets. We are talking about 300 billion. I'll remind you that Zelensky, for example, yesterday, when he was visited with lots of European politicals, stated that she said that the frozen Russian assets are Ukraine's money, not the money of Ukraine and its partners, but only Ukraine's. So that was stated by him yesterday, but today he got a very cold refusal from the European Union, because Europeans reported that France, Germany, Italy, Spain and the European Commission are against the transfer of frozen Russian assets to Ukraine. Western investors are not concerned that anti-Russian measures could scare off foreign investors from the European Union. So obviously nobody is going to transfer money to Zelensky, but obviously currently the European Union is trying to find a solution how to force the Russians during these peace negotiations, peace agreements, peace talks, to force the Russians to keep this money on the territory of the European Union. Furthermore, they would like to take all this money, to spend them. Of course, and I'll remember that since the beginning of this year, when there were first talks between Russian delegations and delegations of the United States of America, there were several statements about this money, and some sources reported that the Russians can accept that this money would be taken by the European Union in case if this money will be spent to restore Ukraine as well. So to restore buildings, to restore factories, to restore everything, including the territories that are currently located under complete Russian control. So the Russians can accept that the European Union will use this money, for example, to restore Ukraine, but only in case if some part of this money would be used to restore infrastructure, buildings, and many other things on the territory of Lugansk, Donetsk, Zaporozhye, Kherson, and Crimea. Nobody knows what kind of part we are talking about, but something tells me that this is going to be the biggest part. And there we're going to see the same schema. They're going to be a fund, this money, and the Russians will sign contracts most likely with European, probably producers of different materials that will be used on these territories with the purpose to restore all these territories territory, this eastern, the southern part of Ukraine. So with Europeans, everything is clear. The next resource we can see that the sides are fighting for, of course, is the power itself. And this is the part that Zelensky wants to keep. He's fighting for this because he doesn't care how much money Ukraine is going to have debts with the United States of America. He doesn't care even about this 300 billion. The most important thing that cares him, whether he is going to become the next president of Ukraine. And furthermore, when talking about changes of the territory of Ukraine, obviously this should be done through the changes in the main law of Ukraine. We're talking about constitution. He needs to change this, and most likely during all these changes he will allow himself to be a president for many terms, not just for 2 terms or something like this. He will explain this by many things. So the main purpose of Zelensky is to save his power. But when talking about this situation, he has a lot of problems, both with the Russians and the United States of America. For example, today both Putin and Trump made a lot of statements about this. For example, Putin stated that Russia and the United States want to achieve peace in Ukraine as soon as possible, and Zelensky is preventing this. Zelensky has driven himself into that, and with a decree banning renegotiations with Russia, Zaluzhny rating is 2 times higher than Zelensky. Zelensky is avoiding peace talks because he will quickly lead to the need to leave the martial law and therefore elections. Almost the same things were stated by Donald Trump, that there should be elections, many other things. And today we got a lot of reports from different Western media that part of Trump's inner circle wants to replace Zelensky with a more compliant successor as a Ukrainian president. The thing is that, according to information we have, most likely both the Russians, the United States of America and the European Union would like to change Zelensky for someone else. Of course, when talking about the European Union, they stand on the position that Zelensky should keep his position, should keep his presidency until the end of the war and until the end of the special military operation. But they're doing this, and they're saying this because they are not involved into the negotiation process between Russia and the United States of America, which means that there are too many questions about the future of these 300 billion, because the Russians, after the end of the war, will force and will demand European Union to return this money back, and nobody knows for sure whether this money exists or something like this. So the question for power is very important for Zelensky. And now let's discuss the Russia. What is the main interest of Russia in this area? And obviously, when talking about Russia, the most important issue, the most important demand, not the territories, but it's very important, not the presence of the NATO forces on the territory of Ukraine. Obviously, this is very important, but not so important as the entity of Ukrainian army itself. Ukrainian army, these 800,000 soldiers, is the biggest problem for the armed forces of Ukraine, for Putin and for the Russian Federation. Because I'm telling the truth, when talking about Ukraine army, currently I believe that this is the biggest problem for everybody. Zelensky doesn't have enough money to support this army, from one side. The United States of America says that they don't need this army. European Union should protect itself, and some army, European army, Ukraine army should be set on the balance of the European Union. The European Union doesn't have this money. Russia can't allow that this 800,000 army will be taken inside of European army or the NATO army, because it's 800,000 people who knows how to fight with the Russians, who knows how to sometimes even show success on the ground. So obviously the only option for the Russian is to demilitarize the Ukraine army. But then this is a very big problem for the European Union, because there is no difference if between let's say demilitarization of Ukraine, when talking about when these 800,000 people will go homes, there is no difference between this and, for example, if Russia takes the power in Kiev itself. Because if Russia takes control over Kiev, then there are very high chances that the Russians will mobilize these 800,000 people once again, and they will join 1.5 million army of Russian Federation, and together 2.3 million army can do whatever they like in the European part of the world. So obviously this is not something that the European countries will accept. And for example, for this reason, the President of France, Macron, and the Prime Minister of Great Britain, United Kingdom, came to the United States of America on talks with Trump. France was trying to provide their own plans about the future of European forces, about the peacekeepers contingent, and many, many other things. So Macron and Keir Starmer understand they found a solution how to make everything very interesting. The Russians want the Ukrainians to reduce their army, but the European countries can't allow this army to be taken by the Russians. So that's why I believe that they came to conclusion that it is smart to take this army, maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe 400,000 of current Ukrainian forces, and to remove them from Ukraine, let's say, to the border between NATO countries, European Union, and Ukraine and the Russian Federation. And this is going to be very cheap, let's say, army, because the Ukrainians gets less salaries than, for example, European soldiers. And this army can be something like guarantees. If anything happens, these 800,000 can always enter Ukraine, back Ukraine, and to restore this war from the beginning. But then the Russians have problems with this, because the Russian Federation will never allow these 800,000 people to be taken by any side of the conflict. And currently, these four sides, the European Union, Russian Federation, the United States of America, and Zelensky, they can find agreement almost on every single matter. 500 billion, 300 billion, the power in Kiev, and many, many other questions, territory integrity. But currently, nobody knows what to do with this Ukrainian army, because this army is too strong, and anybody, any side of the conflict who can take this army inside of their own forces can become multiple stronger than they're as strong than right now. And this is obviously unacceptable for everybody. So what are they going to do with this? I don't know, but obviously time will tell. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground. And first we're going to talk about the Sudzha direction. According to information we have, the Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to improve their position significantly. In this video we can see how 2 Russian soldiers were raising the flag and waving the Russian flags and the signs of the units that were taking the settlement of Pogribki under complete control. So based on this video, we're not adjusting anything, because this territory used to be under complete Russian control according to geolocations we got in the past. But now we have also 100% proof that most likely not just the northern part of Pogribki, but most likely everything until the border with Orlovka was already taken by the Russians. So let's wait for additional geolocations, but I believe that in the very near future, during the next several days, we will adjust everything, let's say, to the north of this red line, because we believe that everything to the north is already under complete Russian control. Furthermore, according to information we have, according to different pro-Russian resources, today, as a result of offensive operation, the armed force of Russian Federation managed to improve their position significantly and to get as close as possible to the N07 road. Today, several pro-Russian resources reported that this road was already captured by the Russians with FPV drone control. So basically, the main supply road, the main supply artillery is already under complete Russian fire, which obviously will lead to significant problems for the armed forces of Ukraine. Furthermore, today we got a lot of unconfirmed reports that Ukrainians this upcoming night, or maybe this upcoming days or week, are going to begin the retreat process with the purpose to evacuate their soldiers and vehicles and assets from Sudzha and Sudzha direction. So obviously the next several weeks are going to be very interesting, because once again some source reported that Ukrainians are about to begin running from this area, and obviously the Russians will try to do everything they can with the purpose not to allow the Ukrainians to finish this. So we see lots of icons in this area. The Russians establish complete control over the Sudzha direction. The Ukrainians suffer significant losses, and basically they can't do anything with this. They have just 2 solutions: either to continue supporting their forces, but now the losses are very heavy because the Russians control the roads, or they need to retreat. But if they retreat, this is going to be significant media loss of Zelensky and his political defeat, which can lead to unpredictable consequences to the stabilization, to the stability of Ukraine and Ukrainian society. So anyway, let's wait and see, but something tells me that in the very near future the situation here will be resolved. So So this is the statement made by the Russian side. Ukraine armed forces units are preparing to retreat from the Kursk region after the Russian army took the Yunakovka-Sudzha road under fire control. That was stated by RIA Novosti, citing sources in Russian security agencies. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Kupiansk direction. According to information we have, during the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians conducted several counterattacks on the line between Kutkovka and the road between the settlement of Zapadne and Dvorichne. And as a result of these counterattacks, the Ukrainians most likely managed to read the road R79. At least geolocation about this, we have geolocation that confirm this, but we don't know for sure whether the Ukrainians managed to stabilize the situation. To dig in deeper, according to this video, the Ukrainian units and vehicles that were involved in that offensive operation were completely defeated and destroyed. So as for now, we are not changing the map. If we continue receiving updates that can confirm Ukrainian progress, of course we will do this. Now let's discuss the situation in the area to the east of the river Oskol in the northern Kupiansk direction. Today, according to information we have, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to improve their position significantly and to take additional fields, fortifications between the settlements of Arlyanka and Stepovo Novosilka. So these are the changes on the ground that we can see how the Russians managed to improve their positions. As for the southern Kupiansk direction, today the main updates are coming from the line between Zarechna and Tarskoye. As you can see, we have lots of icons, and basically this is the beginning of the final stage of the battle for the Ukrainian side and for the Russian side of the river of Zherebets. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians published lots of videos, lots of episodes of how they were attacking and bombing the Ukrainian vehicles that Ukrainians were trying to use between the city of Liman and the village of Tarskoye. Maybe the Ukrainians were evacuating soldiers wounded, maybe the Ukrainians were trying to bring additional forces and reinforcements, but obviously everything went wrong because the Russians had full control over this territory. We see complete control over the main supply lines, which means that the Russians are about to begin the final offensive operation on the ground. And the same things are happening right now in the Siversk direction. Today the Russians continue improving their positions in the area of Belogorovka. We got lots of reports that the Russians were improving their positions, trying to get additional strongholds in the fortifications, trying to force the Ukrainians to fall back. So we see from the global perspective that in the very near future, probably 2-3 weeks, the Russians will try to attack the city of Siversk from the area of Tarskoye and from the area of Belogorovka along the Seversky Donetsk river, with the purpose to unite two forces somewhere in the area of Dronovka, and from Dronovka to attack the city of Siversk from the north or from behind. We don't know for sure when exactly the negotiation process is going to stop, when, how, and so on, but obviously we know for sure that until the final signatures are being established on the papers, the Russians will continue their offensive. As for the Toretsk and Chasiv Yar direction, the Russians during the previous 24 hours also destroyed lots of Ukrainian vehicles. We have lots of videos, geolocations that confirm how the Russians were clearing Ukrainian positions. Most likely, and we expect that the Russians are about to begin probably another offensive operation in this area with the purpose to break the Ukrainian defense completely and to take the city of Chasiv Yar under complete control. As for now, there are still very heavy clashes. The Russians are trying to improve their positions before the final rush. As for the Toretsk direction, as I told you today, we got a lot of let's say statements, lots of articles and different videos from Ukrainian side that confirm Ukrainian counterattack in the area of the city of Toretsk, and as a result of those counterattacks, some sources reported that Ukrainians managed to get the stadium in the central part of the city. As for now, we don't have geolocations to videos that can be geolocated, but obviously during the next several hours we're going to receive some, and maybe during the next video we will discuss the situation in details. Anyway, very interesting report published by the Ukrainian side. Now let's discuss the situation in the South Donetsk direction and in the Pokrovsk direction. The Russians managed to stabilize the situation in the area of Peshchane. I'll remind you that during January and February, the Ukrainians carried out several successful counterattacks that allowed them to restore the control over the settlement of Peshchane for several days. But then the weather improved and the Russians counterattacked and managed to restore territories they lost back. Anyway, the Russians realized that they need to do something in this area, and according to information we have, the Russians destroyed logistic bridges that connect the city of Pokrovsk and the city and the town of Zverovo. So the main logistic roads and bridge were completely destroyed by the Russians. And then the Russians established just complete FPV drone control over the, let's say, eastern and the northeastern outskirts of the settlement. Currently, the Ukrainians can't counterattack the Russian forces because they basically can't approach the village. They can't approach Peshchane due to problems with logistic and the roads they can use for these purposes. So we can say that by the 25th of February of 2025, the Russians managed to stabilize the situation completely. From the other side, Ukrainians realized that they can't counterattack in the area of Pokrovsk. They began counterattacks in the area of Novoalexandriivka and Uspenovka. And today, according to information we have, as a result of another counteroffensive operation, the Ukrainians managed to restore control over the central part of the city of the village of Uspenovka. The Ukrainians are saying that something changed in the Russian behaviors and the Russian tactics, and now the Ukrainians reported that they see that the Russian army by the end of February start facing significant problems with logistics, with supply support, with vehicles. Of course, it's normal because during the previous 6 months the Russians lost lots of vehicles during their offensive operation in the direction of Pokrovsk. Now the Russians have problems. They need time to restore, to replace losses, and obviously it will take up to 3 months at least to do this. Now let's discuss the situation in the Dnipro direction. Today, the Ukrainian sources reported that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to take under control the settlement of Zaporozhye completely. There are just 4 settlements left for the Russians. We are talking about Preobrazhenka, Bogdanovka, Troitska, and Gorkovka. If the Russians can take all these settlements under complete control, then the Russians will be able to get the border between Dnipro and Donetsk region. So the current distance between possible positions of the armed force of Russian Federation and the border itself is already less than 7 kilometers, so it's almost nothing. As for the Constantinople direction, during the previous 24 hours, as you can see, we haven't received anything special, just the regular activities. The only thing that I would like to point your attention is that today lots of Ukrainian sources reported that during the previous night between the 24th and the 25th of February, the Ukrainians managed to break through the encirclement in this village of Constantinople and to evacuate up to 90 or 80% of their soldiers. So according to Ukrainian sources, they managed to evacuate from this area and to reach the settlement of Bogatyr without losses. So most likely tomorrow we're gonna see additional changes on the ground in Russian favor, and we're gonna color this pocket as well. So at least according to pro-Ukrainian sources. The main activities from the Russian side are taking place in the area of Velika Novoselovka. And the sources are saying that the primary target for the Russians in this area is to move along the river of Mokre Yaly with the purpose to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Kamar. So this is the primary target for the Russians. With this, they can cut N15 road and they can take under complete control, and they can cut some Cauldron, the Ukrainians that are currently located in this pocket. We know that during the previous days we got a lot of updates that the Russians were moving from the settlement of Andreevka to Alexeyevka. And some sources reported that the Russians entered the northeastern part already. So we see that this is another attempt, this is another cauldron that the armed forces of Russian Federation are trying to create for those Ukrainians that are currently located in the triangle between Adradne, Bogatyr, Rozliv and the fields. So this is the next target for the Russians, and this is exactly what they're going to do. Because if the Russians can take the settlement of Kamar under complete control, then they will then this flower is going to bloom and the Russians will improve their positions to the west, to the east, and of course in the northern directions. As for the Zaporozhye direction, this direction has become active as never. During the previous days, during the previous 24 hours, we continue receiving reports that the Russians continue their offensive operation in the direction of Lapkovo and Stepovo. According to pro-Russian resources, the village of Petykhatki was completely captured and secured by the Russians during the previous 24 hours. Now the Russians are regrouping, and after most likely very short regrouping, they will continue offensive towards the settlement by the name of Lapkovo, and the Russians will continue their offensive operation toward the settlement of Stepovo. Furthermore, additional Russian resources reported that the armed forces of Russian Federation managed to improve their positions in the direction of Shirbaki. So we see that something is happening here. Currently, it's very difficult to understand whether the Russians are just trying to distract Ukrainian attention and to force them to bring some reinforcements in this area, which will force them to probably reduce some defense capabilities on on some other direction, or this is the beginning of something big. The big, when we're talking about something big, we're talking about offensive on the city of Zaporozhye. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.